You're listening to A Glimpse Inside on the Super Power Up Network, the show that affirms for people there is more to life, and it is possible to be happy, inspired, successful, joyous, and free. Welcome. This is A Glimpse Inside. I'm Wendy Perrotti, and today we are wrapping up our 4-part series, Relationship Rescue, with a segment on the art of healing relationships. If you've missed any of the series, you'll want to check them out. In episode 1, you'll get real relationship advice from the trenches as Paula Jean Burns and I share our personal lessons about friendships, teenagers, spouses, and everything in between. In episodes 2 and 3, you can listen in as my client Megan and I dive deep into her struggle to find love. You'll hear us talk about what's in the way and how true love, connection, and intimacy is 100% possible for everyone, no matter where you're starting from. My guest today focuses on the relationships between mothers and daughters, but her spot-on insights and teachings can be applied to help heal any kind of relationship. I've spent time with Karen in person, and I can tell you all that the energy of love and peace that flows from this woman is absolutely palpable. I know you're going to feel it too. Karen C.L. Anderson's incredible work helps women take a compassionate look at the troubled relationships they have with their mothers and or their daughters and guides them to reveal patterns, heal shame, and transform legacies. She's the author of The Peaceful Daughter's Guide to Separating from a Difficult Mother, Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters, A Guide for Separation, Liberation, and Inspiration, The Difficult Mother-Daughter Relationship Journal, A Guide for Revealing and Healing Toxic Generational Patterns, and Overcoming Creative Anxiety, Journal Prompts and Practices for Disarming Your Inner Critic and Allowing Creativity to Flow. That one's coming out in the spring-summer of 2020. Karen also runs occasional programs and workshops and is at work on a memoir, A Letter to the Daughter I Chose Not to Have. She lives in southeastern Connecticut. Karen, I am so happy to have you here today.
I am dittoing that, co-signing that. Thank you.
So 4 books in 5 years is like wildly prolific. Have you always been a writer?
Yes, I have. Not always a writer of books, but taking a look back over the years, writing has always played it's part of who I am.
What made you decide that you were going to take that to that next level and have it be sort of your mission, your calling and profession in life?
Well, as a little girl, I had this dream that I'd be standing on a stage and I'd be belting out a song that would make people shiver and feel amazing. And it turns out singing is not my thing. And for many, many years, and I went to college. Let me just back up a quick second and say, when I went to college, I was going to major in journalism. I did major in journalism. And I think that made my parents relieved because they thought, okay, that's like, she's not going to be a starving artist. And I sort of envisioned myself as being a foreign correspondent or something like that. But so I went to college and I ended up spending many years as a plastics industry trade magazine journalist and editor. And I did actually travel overseas. So I guess in a way I was a foreign correspondent.
On plastics.
And so this writing thing was, it was like, this is what I want. This is what I wanted since I was a, small child, was to be a writer. The singing, I think, was maybe what I thought was the thing, but it wasn't. It was more the telling of the stories, right? The ability to move people with my voice. And I did the plastics thing for, close to 20 years. had a somewhat of a midlife crisis, I guess. I don't know if it was midlife at the time, but the magazine that I was working for, the company sold it to a different company, and the new company didn't want me. And I kind of had as I said, like a sort of a midlife crisis of, well, what, all I know how to do is write about plastics. And so what did I do after that? I actually went to work for a Borders bookstore that was opening. And from there, I started doing some freelance writing for local publications and local companies. It was kind of business to business kinds of things. And then in 2009, which was 10 years ago now, which is significant to me, it's like realizing, wow, 10 years, I started a blog. And very quickly realized that even though I had been a writer all those years, I had never really written for myself. I hadn't really taken a look inside. I really hadn't, excavated myself. And I was going through some struggles with body image and weight and self-acceptance. And so the blog sort of became, I've often said that it's how I saved my life. Because I started just to write from my heart. And it just, gosh, I can't believe, it's like when I think about it, I cannot imagine my life without that. And so my process as a writer is interesting. I don't set out to like, okay, I'm going to write a book about this. I basically write something every day, even if it's just little notes for myself. And what I've come to realize is my process is that I write every day, and over 10 years of doing that has created a lot of material. Some of it's, not, some of it's not for public consumption. A lot of people would say some of the things that I do put out there for public consumption shouldn't be. But so what ends up happening is I take a look at what I've written and I'm like, oh, this could be the basis of a book.
Mm.
So that's, I think, the quick version of how I got to write books.
What I love about your work, Karen, is that it's so intensely personal. And I think that, at least as a reader, that's what makes it so relatable. For you, kind of living on the inside out like that, with so many of your so much of your personal life described through your work, what, if anything, about that is challenging or difficult for you?
It's weird how it feels like a very natural thing for me to do. I know a lot of people struggle with that. They're afraid. And trust me, I'm afraid of a lot of things, but for some reason, that's not one of them. I think the thing that I might struggle with is in making sure that I'm telling, that the stories that I'm telling are mine to tell and not somebody else's. And I've stepped on toes in that regard. And so that I take that, hopefully very seriously, and I'm very careful with that because, it's not my intention to throw anyone under the bus or to be telling stories that aren't mine to tell.
Yeah. So these books have had a literal groundswell of readership. It's so cool from where in such a short time, how they've just really exploded in popularity. What surprised you most about the response you've gotten?
Oh boy. It didn't surprise me that it was an issue. I knew it was an issue. Difficult mother-daughter relationships. I think what surprised me and it took a little while, was to sort of see, okay, there's the micro scenario of, say, one mother and one daughter struggling, but that it's that there's a macro view of it as well. It's sort of like the context in which difficult mother-daughter relationships happen and why. And seeing how universal some of those issues are, and how how the systems that we have, not just in our country, but all over the world, systems of oppression, systems, that don't value women equally, or, certain other groups of people equally, and how that affects our humanity. And so seeing, as I said, sort of like, that's what surprised me, was like, and I'm a big picture thinker. I'm always like sort of, looking at the big picture, but it hadn't occurred to me that was part of this issue.
Yeah, that's so powerful when you think about it, right? Our mother-daughter relationships are truly, potentially the most pivotal relationship for half the population on the planet. And there's a real spectrum of how those relationships go from completely dysfunctional to relatively healthy, but none of them are perfect, right?
No.
It's always a challenge because it is such an incredibly intimate relationship.
Well, that, women, especially mothers, especially, are held to such a high standard.
Oh, yeah.
And we hold ourselves to that standard as well. And we beat ourselves up with that standard. And, I'm not a mother. I purposely chose not to be a mother. That was just not something I wanted. But I know lots of mothers and, they talk about the mommy wars, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you work, then you're bad. If you stay home, you're bad. Like, and I'm oversimplifying it, but, just all this pressure, all of this perfection, expected perfection, and it.
Yeah. And the letting go of policing one another, I think is definitely appears in so many places in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to take a really, really quick break. So for those of you out there, we have been talking with Karen C.L. Anderson about her very personal work as an author. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be diving into Karen's best practices around the art of healing relationships. And as always, I'll be giving you all some tools that you can start using today for creating transformation in your own life. Karen, if listeners want to learn more about you or your books, where can they find it?
My website, which is www.kclanderson.com.
Terrific. Stay with us. You won't want to miss what's coming.
Hello, everyone. This is Tonya Dawn Rekla, Executive Director of Superpower Experts, and we want to thank each of you for making Superpower Up the #1 podcast network for personal development and spiritual growth. Because people like you have the courage to say that mindfulness, healthy living, disrupting reality, the pursuit of consciousness, responsible entrepreneurship, and radical parenting matter, we now amass over 1 million downloads monthly in more than 90 countries. Our numbers keep growing because there are far more people willing to live divergently than mass media wants to acknowledge. For you, the change makers, the light bearers, the way showers, we say thank you. If you're ready to take the next step in your evolution, go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the Superpower Quiz. And as Neva Lee Rekla, our youngest podcaster, likes to remind us, remember, we all have superpowers and we can change the world.
Welcome back. Today, you're listening to The Art of Healing Relationships, part 4 of our 4-part series, Relationship Rescue. I'm here with author Karen C.L. Anderson. Karen, in your bio, you use the terms reveal patterns, heal shame, and transform legacies. Really powerful words. Can you explain to us what that means to you?
Yes. So, we all have our patterns, right? You've talked about that in your podcasts around, there's the facts and then there's the stories.
Yeah.
And so many of our patterns, develop out of those stories, right? They become our identity. And it's like etched in stone. It's just the way I am. And so when we can reveal those patterns to ourselves, through compassionate inquiry, it then gives us the opportunity to heal them. And when I talk about healing, my sort of definition of healing is that we take something that is a source of suffering and we transform it into something that is a source of wisdom.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And so, the shame, right? Healing shame. I think that shame is pretty much one of the hardest emotions that we experience as humans. And I'm not saying that that shame should be eradicated. I think shame, when we can heal it in a healthy way, it doesn't mean that we never feel shame again, but that we're more shame resilient, that we can love ourselves through it, right? And that our shame can then become a source of wisdom for us.
Wisdom, growth. Yeah, I agree.
And so calling shame out, right? I'm not the first person to talk about that. I mean, the work of Brené Brown has been very influential in my work. But understanding how unconscious shame can be so harmful is part of why I talk about healing shame. Not to be, as I said, not to be mistaken for you're never going to feel shame again.
Yeah. No, there's no finish line to any of this stuff.
And then, so then we're able to transform our legacy, right? We're able to, when we do this work, we're able to then change the future and the past in some ways. That's kind of like a woo concept. But I think that there's a magic in when you do this work. There's that old expression. It's like when you change the way you look at something, the something changes. So that, I think, is sort of that healing the legacy or transforming the legacy piece is you change your relationship to the past and to the future.
Yeah, that ties in for me right back to one of the very first things that you said about identity. The way that we identify ourselves has such huge repercussions on our actions and our outcomes, in both simple and complicated ways. Like if somebody ever says to me, I'm trying to give up meat, I know that I'm going to see them at Five Guys next week. Right. I mean, clearly I'm not a vegetarian if I'm saying I go to Five Guys. I know that they're probably not, that's not going to be something that becomes a transformation in their life. But when somebody who I've seen at Five Guys in the past, all of a sudden says to me, I'm a vegan, I know I'm not going to see them again.
Right.
I'm a vegan is a new identity. And all of the things that you're talking about here in healing relationships, it sounds like they start from healing your identity, how you see yourself in the scheme of the world and in the scheme of your relationships.
Yeah. I mean, the mother-daughter relationship was, I chose it, or it chose me for a good reason. And I used to spend a lot of time blaming my mother, and then blaming myself for all the pain that I was experiencing in my life and the sort of deep lack of confidence and shame. Gosh, so much shame. And it was when I started looking at all the stories I was telling myself about myself in relationship to my mother, right? That's when I realized that I had constructed an identity that wasn't serving me, to put it simply, and to put it, it was intense.
Yeah. So what do we do about that?
About the identity?
When we realize, right, that we've constructed these stories,
Yeah,
right, about our moms or about our daughters or about any relationship in our lives.
Well, I can tell you what I do is I question it. I question everything. I ask myself, when I think this about myself, when I believe this about myself, how do I feel? And I'm all about getting into the body, and to pay attention to the effect that my thoughts and my beliefs and the identity that I've created for myself, how does that literally feel in my body? And we are so disconnected from that as a culture.
Oh my God, you're so right. I have told people that I'm like a head that drags her body around with it.
But how meta, right? Our parents, our mothers taught us this, not to be cruel and awful, but because it was getting back to that macro picture, right? Nobody's got time for messy emotions.
Mm.
We don't have time for you to be in your body. And the wisdom of the body, which is the emotion, isn't prized like intellect and logic and thinking, right? So the disconnection between the mind or I should say the brain and the body is one of the most traumatic things that happens to any of us. And so noticing how I feel when I think thoughts, like, for example, one of the patterns that I have revealed to myself over the years is that I have a tendency to believe that I'm a pathetic loser.
Okay, you're not. Just so that you know.
But no, right? But we all have.
Yeah, we all
those things, right? And so, and that feels awful. Mm-hmm. Before I was thinking it unconsciously. Then once I was onto myself, I'm like, I would catch myself and I'd question it. I would notice how it feels in my body, that shame feels. I mean, I can tell you right now, for me, shame, I feel it in my throat. My face gets hot and feels prickly. And that's the main sort of physical sensations that I notice when I have shame. It's like I can barely swallow.
Mm. Yeah, and my spit dries up.
Yeah, so now sometimes it's a matter of like, oh, I'm feeling that sensation. Am I thinking that thing? And if so, why? And so so much of the work, and it seems so simplistic and cliche to say, but it really is true. It's about the awareness, the noticing, the observing, and then a healthy dose of compassion with it.
For ourselves as well as for other people.
Totally. Because you can't have selective compassion.
Right. It's so true. It doesn't matter who my clients are or where they fit in the world, whether they are the CEOs of companies or whether they're stay-at-home moms or have enormous educations or high school education. It absolutely doesn't matter. When we dial in to what really is holding them back, every single human on the planet, it comes down to, holy cow, I'm not good enough. And what the hell is going to happen if they find out?
Yep.
That's the thing for every single one of us. So anything that we can do to become aware of it. And I love you're telling people to tap into their body as like a cue that, there's no spit in my mouth. What am I afraid of here? What am I afraid is going to be exposed about me? Really such such a brilliant way to be able to tap in quickly and ask those questions. Do I really believe that? What's the worst thing that could happen? Right?
I want to believe it. Is it serving me? I mean, it's funny because sometimes there are thoughts and beliefs that we have that serve us, but that they don't make any sense, or they're actually not technically true.
Mm.
And to that, I'm like, if it works for you, and only you can know if it works. And you said something before about, how our actions are informed by all of this and how we show up in the world. The model that I learned and I share is that, we have those thoughts and beliefs that create the identity, and that those thoughts and beliefs then show up in our bodies as the emotional wisdom, which we tend to just skip right over. But it's the emotions that drive then how we show up and what the actions we take or don't take, or, our behavior.
And the outcomes, right? And then the actions drive the outcomes, and it creates that circle that either moves us forward or keeps us stuck. Yep. All starting with those beliefs and that identity. It's so true.
Sort of realizing that I'm stuck is an optional thought, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a fact. It's just it's an optional thought, and we love to indulge. We love to indulge in those kinds of thoughts, right?
Massaging those stories of, I always think of that Simpsons episode where Bart had like a Band-Aid, and I think it was Lisa kept pushing on like his boo-boo, and he kept saying, ouch, quit it, ouch, quit it, ouch, quit it, ouch, quit it. But there was like something delicious about the pain also, right? Like he wants to keep pressing on the cut.
Yes, exactly.
And we do that all the time.
Yeah.
So Karen, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, and then then we beat ourselves up. But you know what? To me, the best way to sort of catch it is to then add in that sort of compassion or curiosity or fascination, and like, oh yeah, there I go again, thinking I'm a pathetic loser.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating?
Right. And not judging ourselves for it, or even judging the thought. There it is.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
That
practice alone can change everything.
It is absolutely, you're right. It is absolutely transformative. And in any of that awareness, when we're working on ourselves and growing ourselves, it's always step one, right? That the awareness, and then the letting go of the judgment and the rules and the expectations.
Mm-hmm.
In your work with mothers and daughters, or with any kind of relationships, where do we take it from there? Like, where do we take it now? We're kind of owning this new sense of self as best we can, right? In drabs and dribbles as we go along. How do we apply that now externally to the other people in our lives, especially when the relationship has been difficult?
So I think the most powerful thing we can do is model our transformation, right? It's how we choose to now show up in the relationship. And it can be messy. It can be awkward. The other person might not be ready for it. My experience with my mother is that the quick version of our story is that at the end of 2010, something happened, and I told her that I didn't want to ever see her again. I wanted to cut her out of my life. And from there, I sort of then became obsessed with her and wanting to justify to everyone else in the world, all the ways she'd done me wrong. I found this work. I started applying this work to that relationship. And, that's been almost 10 years now. And there have been fits and starts. There have been hard conversations. There have been long spaces where we have not been in contact. but I task myself lovingly with asking myself, how can I like and respect myself in this relationship? Right? It's always inside of me. I don't expect her to change. I don't, it's not about changing her behavior or, changing who she is. She gets to be who she is. And I can love her and have great boundaries.
Yeah. It's, that reminds me of, oh my God, I love her. And her name just popped out of my Byron Katie's work.
Yes.
Loving what is. I know that early on in my life, I found it shocking, right, at first, that, she asked us all to turn everything onto ourselves, because we're kind of taught, this is your fault, this is my fault, and this is your fault, and this is my fault, and this is your fault. And living in that mindset can be so chaotic, because we have expectations of people that are outside of their expectations of themselves. And that thing about learning to meet people where they are and to accept them as they are. And I find that with clients, that's the challenging piece, is the nuance of the boundaries, right? Yeah. Well, if I accept you as you are, does that mean that now I'm living at the mercy of your behavior? Absolutely not.
Right.
If I accept you as you are, it means that I see you as whole, as you are in this moment. I can love you as you are, and I can create boundaries that say, and when you behave this way, it's really unacceptable for me, and I can't be near that.
Yeah.
That's so different than saying you need to behave this way in order to be near me.
Yeah.
Right? It's freedom lives there, right?
Total freedom. And, that idea that, there's something I feel like it's really important to mention, which is that for some mothers and daughters, some people just in general, it's absolutely the right decision to never see the other person again. And you can do that in an empowering way. You can do that in a way so that you are not putting yourself in a less than position.
Yeah. You can do that in a way that is healing.
Yes. Right. And also understanding that, I think I don't know if we've brought up trauma yet here, but, this is, I'm not an expert in it. It's something I'm delving into more and more, but is understanding that our nervous systems, we can't control them. Mm-hmm. Yes, we can control whether or not we say something, right? We can control to a certain extent our thoughts, but we cannot control the part of our brain that when it perceives danger, acts in a certain way, right? Or, has us acting like in a fight, flight, freeze. We can, once we're aware that, there might be some trauma here, we can then learn to expand the capacity of our nervous systems. But that's, I think a lot of times people will take this information that we're talking about here where, like Byron Katie and use your thoughts and blah, 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 and then use that against themselves because they can't yet do it. And then they're like, oh, well, see, there's something really wrong with me because I can't, I have this nervous system trigger, and they're not even knowing that that's what it is. And so it sort of serves to become a punishment, I think.
I absolutely love that you brought that up. That's so powerful and so incredibly true. Our physiologies can work for us and they can work against us. And like everything else that we talked about here today, the more aware that you become of it, the more choice that you have, the less judgment, especially self-judgment that you have, and the more growth is possible for you. So, wow, thank you for bringing that up. That's really You're right. It is a really important point.
And I think, what goes along with that is the concept of, I know it by the term spiritual bypassing, which is, just love and light. That's all you need. Which it's not.
Yes.
We're built to feel the whole range of emotions. Our bodies are built for them, all of them.
Right on, sister. I say to people all the time, just because we're talking about healing, or we're talking about growth, or we're talking about love, or we're talking about happiness, we're not talking about hearts and rainbows. Exactly. This is no like bibbity bobbity boo unicorn stickers stuff here. We're talking about your real emotions. And when we lie to ourselves about what those real emotions are, things get worse.
Yeah.
They don't get better. Right? It's just living in the real.
Yeah. We have a tendency to take our emotions and then make them mean something. Like if I'm feeling shame, then I must be bad. Yeah. If I feel hate, I must be bad.
Yeah. And there's a whole physiological thing that we don't have time to get into now, right? But that our brains like to, they are wired to put the answer to the puzzle. Yeah. So whether or not you know the real answer, and newsflash, you usually don't, right? Your brain makes up a quick answer for it that it gets behind with all of its might. And man, that can take us really off track if we don't understand that that's just another piece of our physiology at play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. That's really cool stuff. So I have this last question that I try to squeeze in wherever I can, and I'm dying to ask it of you. If you met I'm sure you've heard this question before, but I love it. If you met 25-year-old Karen today, what would you tell her?
I would tell her that she's in for a wild ride. I would tell her that she is going to experience things that she can't even imagine, like on both sides of the spectrum, or, I hate to say positive and negative, but like, you're gonna feel a lot of things that you can't even imagine yet. And you are resilient and strong. And yes, you think differently than some other people, and you do things differently, and that's all going to be okay. That's actually going to be your superpower.
Beautiful. And I love that what you would tell your 25-year-old self is like what you tell us all in your books and in your work.
Oh, thank you.
So can you, one more time, remind us where we can find out more about you in those books?
Yep. My website is the easiest place to find everything. And that is KCL Anderson, ANDERSON.com.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, let's talk tools. Today, I've got a quick little tool for you. It's my taking steps to active listening tool. Whether we're asking questions of ourselves or having conversations in relationships, that really curious listening without judgment, listening actively is such an integral tool to be able to master. And it's kind of not the way we've been taught to listen. So it makes sense to think about it in a new way, especially if you're wanting to improve your relationships with other people. So it's 3 steps, 3 to 5 steps, and I'll explain that in a minute. The first 3 are the critical steps to listening, no matter where or when you are, who you're talking to, or what kind of conversation you're having. And those are: be present. Okay. Newsflash, we are so often not present. That means when someone else is talking, you're not waiting to talk or sort of creating the really exciting phrasing that you're going to throw into the conversation next, you're really with that person. It means that you're not scrolling through your to-do list while they're talking. It means being completely present with the person who's speaking to you. Number 2, this is really the hard one. Withhold your judgment and opinion. Just take it, put it in a little Tupperware container in your brain, put it aside. You'll still have it. You'll still have that opinion. You'll still have your judgment when you need it. But by kind of putting it aside, you're open to hearing things that you otherwise would have missed because it doesn't match what your opinion or judgment was. So step 2, withhold opinion and judgment when you're listening. And 3, it's really about connecting with the person that you're with. Let them know that you're listening. Make eye contact. Go ahead and smile, frown, furrow your brow if you don't understand, right? Let the person that you're speaking with know that you're with them through your body language and your eye contact. And you can use a little tool that I call acknowledge and validate. And this doesn't mean that you have to agree with what you're hearing. It just lets the person who's speaking know that they're being heard. So if what you're listening to is something that you agree with, it might sound like you nodding your head and then saying, wow, that sounds really exciting. I'd love to hear more about that. Or wow, I think the exact same thing. I really hear how excited you are about that. If it's somebody that you're in a sort of a conflict conversation with, you can use this same tool without necessarily agreeing. You can say something like, I hear how important this is to you. Holy cow, I can see how angry you are. This must be really important to you. So little terms like that, acknowledging and validating, lets the person who's speaking know that they're being heard without you giving up anything on your side, right? And what that does is not only serve to engage both parties in the conversation more fully, but it unspooks that fear component in the physiology, that fight or flight response that we get when we feel that somebody isn't listening or they're not agreeing with us. We tend to get very reactive, and then conversations tend to escalate. So by using acknowledging and validating, just in that way, hey, I hear you. This sounds like it's really important to you. You unspook that limbic part of the brain and really put that more executive functioning part of the brain back in charge. Really, really powerful to connect with people in that way. The other 2 steps are steps that you really want to dive into when it's an important conversation. When it's a conversation that needs to be really clear, that needs to have a mutual understanding, or that really needs to have an outcome one way or the other. And those are clarifying, would be step 4. That's just making sure that you're both hearing the same things. We so often don't. So using simple non-judgmental statements like, so what I'm hearing you said is blah, blah, blah. How close am I to accurate? Gives you a chance to reconnect and make sure you're on the same page. If you're the one who's been speaking, you can say something like, wow, I've really been going off on this thing. I want to make sure we're on the same page. What are you hearing that I'm saying? It's a way of checking in and making sure that everybody's on the same page. Number 5 is summarize. When something's important and you want to know that you've agreed on an outcome or you've agreed to disagree on an outcome, it's important to close the conversation with, okay, so here's where I think we are. Are we on the same page with that? Great. Next steps are, boom. You've summarized the conversation and brought it to a close that both parties have heard in the same way. And when we're communicating with people, that's so important because we all have different filters. We all have different perspectives, and they can help or they can hurt when we're having conversations. So if you want a printout of today's critical listening steps, you can tap into my toolbox, and you'll find that at aglimpseinside.superpowerexperts.com. Again, you'll find my toolbox and all of the other episodes on aglimpseinside.superpowerexperts.com. I want to thank Karen C.L. Anderson for sharing so much with us today. And thanks to all of you for listening in to our 4-part series, Relationship Rescue. Make sure you tune in next time as we launch into the series, Letting Happiness Win. Until then, big love.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the superpower quiz today.